Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Muslim Sex Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate your patronage, and I would love it if you could leave me a 5-star review because that really helps me. And if you could like and share this episode with somebody that you know that may benefit, your friend, your colleague, anyone, I'd really love you to share this podcast, especially if you find value in the Muslim Sex Podcast. Also, I'd love for you to subscribe to my YouTube channel and follow me on all my social media. Also, as you probably know, if you've been listening to this podcast, is that I have a practice that is now open in Chappaqua, New York. I see patients for menopause and sexual health, as well as regular gynecology. So if you are looking for a gynecologist that actually spends time with you, that has time to listen to you, then I would invite you to come and see me in my practice, and I'd be more than happy to take care of you. So make sure if you live in the New York area, or even if you don't, come and see me in my office. I'd love to meet you. And also, last but not least, is that I am hosting again my retreat in Morocco for 2025. So if you are looking for a gift for a family member, a friend, yourself, make sure you take a look at our retreat, the Love and Nourish retreat. It will be held September 19th through the 26th, 2025. Again, this year in Morocco, we will be visiting the same towns. We will be in Marrakesh and Essaouira. And as always, we will be providing information and lectures on menopause, perimenopause, nutrition, and also going for cooking classes as well as excursions. So don't miss out. I know a lot of people were sad when they missed out this past year on the Morocco retreat. So make sure that you go and visit the Love and Nourish retreat hosted by Caria Retreats. And now onto the episode. I am an American board certified OBGYN, a mom, a Muslim, and I'm talking about sex. This is the Muslim Sex Podcast. Welcome to the Muslim Sex Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Sadaf, and this is everything you need to know about love and libido and keeping the spark alive. Now, as you know, I don't give out medical advice on the internet or whatever, and definitely not on my podcast. So if you have any questions about love or libido or relationships, whatever, make sure you go see either a sex coach or a sex counselor, a couples counselor. Any one of those will be helpful in helping you move forward in your relationship and trying to keep that spark alive. And if you have issues with libido, make sure you see a sex med doc because they can definitely address all the issues that come up with libido. And of course, this is not any type of religious advice. If you have any questions about your religion, make sure you go speak with your friendly neighborhood religious leader. So this is a Muslim Sex Podcast because I just happen to be a Muslim woman that talks about sex. Now, let's talk about love and libido and keeping that spark alive. So how do we go about doing that? If you've been married or have been in a long-term relationship, you know that the passion doesn't always stay and you kind of have to really work at it, right? So in the beginning, you may think that, everything is spontaneous and easy and, things just kind of flow. And then as you get used to each other, things take a little bit longer. Like, you have to be really intentional about the time that you spend together and also about how to keep that excitement every time you see your partner. So whether you've been together for 5 or for 25 years, life can definitely pull you into different directions with kids, work, and all that stuff in between. And, as we know, intimacy then gets pushed over to the side. So in this episode, we're going to talk about why love and passion sometimes fade and how you can definitely reignite that connection in ways that feel natural and meaningful and definitely easy and doable for you. So let's get started. Now, a little bit about the science of love. Did you know that our brains, of course, are the biggest sexual organ? And I've mentioned that a few times, but I'm sure you're used to that now and you've heard that. And that they have different systems that work together to shape how we connect with our partners. And so they are lust, attraction, and attachment. So lust is the initial physical desire that you feel when you perhaps are attracted to somebody. And that may be, initially what causes you to go and talk, walk over to that person, start talking to them. Attraction, of course, is when you're, really interested in somebody. And that's when the butterflies, the excitement, and all that chemistry seems to happen. And the attachment tends to happen in long term relationships, or kind of when that initial phase kind of fades out a little bit, and is kind of what keeps the partners bonded together. So when you first met your spouse, you probably felt this rush of attraction, and that's because the brain releases dopamine. It's a dopamine, as you know, is one of those feel good neurotransmitters in our brain that makes everything about that person seem just exciting. But over time, that surges of dopamine, they start to fade a little bit. And so that's where the attachment comes in. And that's the glue that holds the relationship together. And especially, as you know, when you get busy or, life gets challenging, so then I'm sure, you probably sit there and think like, wow, when I first met this person, I felt all this excitement and now it's not there anymore. And it's just that your relationship really is now into like a more deeper and stable phase. And that's a good thing, because that also means that it teaches you to be more intentional about the time that you spend together, and definitely to keep that spark alive. So for many couples, though, one of the biggest challenges is finding that time and energy, right? I think that that's usually what I hear a lot of people say, that, after they come home from work, they're just so exhausted. There's really no time left for them and their partner. So between the work, the kids, the household chores, all that other stuff that goes on, definitely there seems to be little space left for relationship, for your relationship, or for anyone's relationship, really. And, how do you keep that excitement going? So women oftentimes, because we see a lot of research done on low libido, and we know that sometimes when there is an uneven distribution of household chores, that can definitely affect libido, right? Because what happens is that, along with doing everything else that women are doing and taking care of the kids in the house and their work and, their job, the sex just becomes one more thing on their to-do list and another chore. And so when something is a chore, then it's no longer fun. And that's a lot of times what results in this decreased libido. And especially if a person is not getting anything out of, let's say, that physical intimacy that they're having, right? If they're not experiencing a good time, if they're not orgasming, if they're not really mindful during that experience, then they're not going to enjoy it. If they don't enjoy it, then they're not going to want it. And then that just becomes another reason why they have no interest in sex, right? And I think that women, when they don't feel desired or don't have that desire, then they're sometimes what can happen is you can have this mismatched libido. And I talk about this is that, oftentimes what you'll have in a relationship is that one partner wants sex more than the other partner. And then what happens is that there's a lot of resentment that builds up in that relationship, and one partner starts to avoid the other person, and then the other person just gets angry and upset at that person, and it causes a lot of friction in the home and also in their relationship. And we know that whatever is going on outside of the bedroom is also happening inside of the bedroom. So if you're not communicating, if you're not talking about all these problems and challenges, then it's also going to affect what's happening in the bedroom. I totally agree with Emily Nagoski, who says that to want sex is to have sex worth wanting, and that if women are not satisfied, or if sex is not pleasurable to them, then it's not worth their time and effort, right? And so we know that there was an analysis in U.S. National Health and Social Life Survey, which was published in JAMA in 1999, and that found that arousal and low desire concerns were categories that were most strongly associated with dissatisfaction in women. So really important to have those conversations, especially if you haven't been having them in your relationship, right? About how you can increase desire in your relationship, how that works. And, we know that as women go through perimenopause and menopause, we know that our testosterone goes down as well as our other hormones, which are progesterone and estrogen. And we know that when we have this decrease in testosterone. Testosterone also helps with libido. And so if there is low testosterone, then that can also affect your libido. And also, of course, the changes that happen in perimenopause, menopause, which are, some women can have issues with, and not just some women, honestly, most women, as they get older into perimenopause and definitely into menopause, when that estrogen goes down, there can be issues with lubrication, there can be issues with painful sex. And so when anything is painful and not pleasurable on purpose, then definitely that's going to affect desire as well. So all of those things are super important, and add to the fact that our bodies and our libidos change as we age, right? We know that hormonal shifts, stress, sleep deprivation, all of those things can affect and play a role in physical intimacy, and even definitely make it less appealing. So now there's a few things, and I'm going to get into actually a lot of things that you can do to help keep that spark alive. And just as a little plug, I do offer a webinar called Resuscitating a Sexless Marriage, which I think is really important. And I offer a lot of practical tips in that webinar as well. But here's the thing, just because the challenges happen doesn't mean that they're going to be permanent, and doesn't mean that there's not a solution, right? So we know that as dopamine also is the neurotransmitter for all things that are pleasurable, right? We also know that oxytocin, which is another hormone in our body, it's considered the love hormone. And what happens is that if you are showing or getting affection from somebody, right, whether it's a cuddle or a kiss or a hug or something like that, the oxytocin promotes this feeling of, the oxytocin is released when you get that hug, that kiss, that cuddle, right? And so what happens then is that you have this increasing feeling of devotion, trust, bonding, and it's released through these physical touches. And that's why it's so important to incorporate touch into our lives, whether it's, hugging family members or your spouse or your partner, because that really promotes that oxytocin release, which results in definitely feeling of a sense of security and love. So with the oxytocin release, it promotes further bonding in that relationship and a sense of attachment. And so that's why it's really important to give and receive physical touch in a relationship. And it's also, oxytocin is also linked to the intensity of orgasms during sexual activity. So just a simple act of touch seems to boost the level of oxytocin release. And like I said, giving someone a massage, cuddling, making love, or giving someone a hug leads to higher levels of this hormone and a greater sense of well-being. So that's really, really important. And I think that, really important to incorporate that in your day-to-day life. It's also important to know that emotional intimacy, so I'll get into really the key aspects of emotional intimacy and how it promotes physical intimacy and also allows you to be more receptive to sexual stimuli, if that's something that's important to you and important to your relationship. So working on emotional intimacy is super, super important. And that starts out by just having regular conversations about how you're feeling, really being intentional when you're being with a person, with your partner, being vulnerable, and allowing that vulnerability to pull you closer to your partner. Not just asking about the big issues, but just really even asking about day-to-day issues of, how was your day, and really getting into it with your partner. That can make you feel more cared for, and definitely expressing your appreciation for things that your partner may do really helps out and makes them feel valued. So really important to know how your partner expresses their love, right? And we know that there is a book, and I'll get into it as well, on the 5 love languages and what they are and how that promotes love and connection in your own relationship. So we know when we start talking about emotional intimacy, just remember that, it's not just, bringing you together, but it also really helps you when you're trying to connect with your partner, even if that's sexually, if that is, on a deeper level. That emotional intimacy helps with all of those connections. So, for example, in 2001, I talk about Rosemary Basson all the time. And if you've been listening to my podcast, you know all about her. And, I was so lucky to have her on last year. But anyways, she created what we know as the human sexual response cycle, which added arousal and desire. And before that, we just had this linear model that was created by Masters and Johnson, and it talked about the sexual response. But here she comes in and she starts to talk about how there is arousal and desire. And sometimes, especially in long term relationships, there's no such thing as spontaneous desire, but just that there is responsive desire. And that a lot of times in those relationships that we have, that the arousal comes actually before the desire, and that's normal, that your body can be responding to a sexual stimuli even before you have the need or the want to become physically intimate with your partner. And then once you have that physical intimacy, that leads to more emotional intimacy. And when you have that connection, when you have that emotional intimacy, that allows you to be receptive to sexual stimuli. Now, remember, if you are receptive to sexual stimuli, that's fantastic. But sometimes there are things in our lives that can affect that. Like, for example, things in what we call the biopsychosocial sphere of our lives. Like, for example, if a person is dealing with anxiety or depression, if they have medications that are affecting their arousal, their libido, or, stresses, hormones, perimenopause, menopause, things that are shifting, causing a shift in hormones, that can also affect whether or not you're going to be responsive to this sexual stimuli, right? And of course, our society, our culture, the way that we've been raised also affects whether or not we are going to be responsive to that sexual stimuli. So really important to kind of understand that concept. And that's why I'd like to spend a little bit of time on it. And also just to kind of tell you, and I'm just going to kind of go off on a tangent just a little bit. And that's because I want to talk a little bit about spontaneous and responsive desire. And actually, this Rosemary Basson believes that there's no such thing as spontaneous desire, and really that everything is responsive desire. And that is because even in a new relationship, we're always planning what the next step is, right? What's going to happen next. And so this constant planning and thinking about that relationship, that new relationship, is actually causing our brains to be primed to a sexual stimuli. So something that happens that we may think is spontaneous, it's actually not, because we've just been thinking about it for so long that now your brain is going to be receptive to anything that is sexually stimulating to you. And then you'll be more likely to become physically intimate with somebody because your brain is already there in that spot, right? As opposed to somebody that is not thinking about sex all the time, or, planning or doing things that promote sexual awareness, then it's going to be unlikely that they'll be responsive to a sexual stimuli, even if it's right in front of them, right? Because if their brain is not primed, if they're not thinking about it, if they're not interested, and it might be due to, side effects of medications, right? We know antidepressants can affect our libido. We know that birth control pills can affect libido by decreasing testosterone that is free floating in the body. So really important to understand how different medications can affect our sexual response. Whether or not they're the perfect fit for you, that's really important to take a look at as well. So going back and just talking about how spontaneous and responsive desire. So really what she said, and I totally agree with her, is that responsive desire is kind of where everything's at, right? That everything is, it's not really, there's no such thing as spontaneous. And I think that the reason why that's important, I'll tell you why I think that's important. The reason why I think that's important is because then you don't feel like there's something wrong with you, right? Or your relationship, that you can still experience that desire in a relationship, in a long-term relationship. And things don't have to feel like, like, oh, all of a sudden or out of the blue, because that's really not the way things happen. So I think that's important to understand. So here, let's go through just some practical tips on for reigniting the spark in your relationship. And I want to give you these because I think it's important to know how to move forward, right? That's kind of the whole thing. And it's to move forward in your relationship, how to connect in your relationship, and how to keep that spark alive. So here's some little tips that I give. One is plan intentional date nights. Now, I know we've talked about this before. I've talked about this a lot on different podcasts with different guests. You really have to be intentional. And when I say that, I mean like, actually plan a date and stick with that date, right? Like, so if you say like every Mondays, whatever, Tuesdays, whatever the day is that you decide you want to get together with your partner, stick to it, right? Don't take up another appointment or something else that you need to do and then skip that date with your partner, because then that makes them feel like you're not really interested, you're not intentional about promoting the connection, the intimacy in your relationship. So really, stick to the date. Make it kind of like, put it on your calendar, make sure that nothing changes that date, of course, barring whatever emergencies, but really just try to stick with that date. Okay. So you can do things that you've never done before, like cooking class, whatever, that may be lots of fun. I actually love cooking classes, doing something that is novel, something that is different, maybe rock climbing, something that you've never done really does. One, it promotes that emotional connection between the two of you, right? It creates that experiential intimacy, but also two, it allows that other person to know that you value them, that you think their time is important and you want to spend that time with them, right? And it also creates that excitement that you often crave that you had perhaps when you were newly courting each other, that excitement, that same excitement, right? That anticipation of something new happening, that is then brought about in your date night, and it creates that feeling of spontaneity, which is what a lot of people tend to crave. Revisit your love languages. So remember, we talked a little bit, and I didn't really get into them, but I'm going to get into them now. So know what your love language is, and if that is words of affirmation, quality time, physical touch, acts of service, or gifts, know what those are so that you can then tell your partner, right? Figure out what your partner's love language is as well, and then focus on that. So if your partner's love language is always acts of service, he's always doing things for you or making life easier for you, putting the gas in your car, whatever that act of service is, then know what his what his love language is. And maybe that is, physical touch. Maybe it's words of affirmation. Maybe it's words of appreciation, right? All of those things. So just know what yours are, know what theirs is, and then let each other know so that you can feel appreciated and really enjoy that time together. Bring back flirting. That's always a nice thing to do. Maybe send a text to your partner, say that you're really looking forward to the evening or the night or whatever, and bring back that flirting that you had in the beginning, right? That, of course, adds the spontaneity, it adds a spark, it adds the spice in your relationship that you may be missing and maybe has long since passed, right? So if you bring that back, that's going to bring back the excitement and the novelty in your relationship. Remember that it's always fun to get one of those flirty texts from your partner. So perhaps do that. Non-sexual touch, that's something that's really important as well. You can try like little gestures like holding hands, giving a back rub, cuddling, a hug, whatever you think is something that your partner may enjoy, that is easy enough for you to do. Go ahead and show them that affection. Practice mindfulness also increases pleasure and arousal. And I talk about that in the episode on mindfulness and how that improves libido, but really being present in the moment really increases. There's definitely been lots of studies done by Dr. Lori Brado and Rosemary Basson that talk about how being really mindful in where you are, what you're doing, really increases lubrication, it increases arousal, increases libido, and can really improve the relationship. So really important. Accepting yourself as you are now. And I get more into that in the episode that I focus on self-love, but really important to just accept yourself as you are. And learning to appreciate your body and being thankful for your body, realizing that love and intimacy change as we age. We know that, the author Marty Klein talks about this in his book called Sexual Intelligence, but just realizing that things will change and that's okay. It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong. It just means that things look different now, and that's okay, right? Things usually change as we get older. So it's about acceptance, and it's about loving where you are, writing down what you want, communication, of course, that's always very important. Doing activities together, giving yourself permission to experience pleasure in your relationship, that's always important. We talk about intimacy, easy ways to increase intimacy. I talked a little bit about communicating your likes, your wants, your desires. Those are all really important to do that. And that's also sharing ideas, creating that intellectual intimacy that people often want. And not just the physical intimacy, but different ways to connect, right? Intimacy is all about connection. And there are different ways to connect, different ways to create that intimacy. It can be intellectual, it can be experiential, it can be physical, it can be emotional. So just know that there are different types of intimacy and how you can cultivate those different types. We talked about, of course, those date nights and experiences together, activities together. All of those things are super important. Emotional is intimacy is, we talked a little bit about this, is being vulnerable, allowing another person into your life, being honest with them and telling them, what you like, what you don't like, but also sharing how you're feeling, how your day is, and not just answering, with one word sentences, but really getting into, what's going on so that they can also be a part of your life. Physical touch, of course, that physical intimacy, holding hands, eye contact, touch, sensual relationship, all of those things are super important. And sometimes that's what people are craving, right? So, and remember, just always remember the connection between emotional intimacy and physical intimacy. And a lot of times, the emotional will lead to the physical, or the physical will lead to the emotional. And that's all normal. And that's part of the human sexual response cycle. But just important to see how those two are related and how they really complement one another. And make sure that you always show appreciation to your partner. Let them know that they're wanted, they're needed, um, and that really improves your relationships as well. And we know that there's been research done on just by showing appreciation in a relationship, just by saying thank you, that really improves a relationship as well, right? So that's all of those things are super easy things that you can do to increase that intimacy, that emotional intimacy, which then eventually leads to physical intimacy in your relationship and can allow you to bring back that spark in your relationship. There's also an episode that I did on Sensei Focus. I've done actually a few of them. And one is with Linda Weiner, and she talks about it and she explains her Sensei Focus. But I think that actually is something that you can use also to bring back that spark in your relationship. You can use mindfulness in your relationship to bring back that spark. So lots of easy things that you can do at home without having to spend really any money, right? Just looking it up and understanding how these modalities work so that you can increase that intimacy in your own relationship. So another thing really quick that I want to talk about is just mismatched libidos. And I think that the reason why I bring that up, because that is something that often really creates havoc in a relationship. And I think that I mentioned this a little bit on date night, but I went through it kind of rather quickly, I think. So just to talk to you a little bit about it, is that, so mismatched libido, what exactly is that? So basically it's when one partner wants sex more than the other partner, right? Maybe they crave that, maybe they need that, and the other partner doesn't really have that type of desire, and causes a huge problem in that relationship. And so the thing that I suggest, and I mentioned this, are really to schedule these nights of intimacy, right? That way one partner has hope and the other one has time to kind of get ready for that evening in their mind, right? Kind of like what I talked about before, is kind of priming your brain so that then that person can be responsive to a sexual stimuli. So That's why those date nights are super, super important, especially when you have mismatched libido. Otherwise, that resentment and anger tends to build in a relationship. And, sexless marriages are actually one of the most common reasons for divorce in the United States. It's one of the top 10 reasons. So this is one way to prevent that, and something easy enough to do. And again, the important thing here is that instead of letting the anger build, is have an open and honest conversation. And you can say, whatever you want, but you can also say something like, I miss being close to you. How can we find more time for ourselves? You have to also remember that, intimacy is not all about like all or nothing. Sometimes just spending time without distraction, putting your phones away, being intentional, writing it in your calendar, saying that, tonight I'm going to spend time with my spouse. Maybe I'm going to watch a movie. Maybe we're going to cuddle on the couch, whatever it is. It's just about creating that time, right? Everyone is busy. Everyone is busy in their lives, but we have to make time for those people that are important. And when we do, we can see a huge shift in that relationship. And make sure that if you have questions or that if you need outside help, right? Maybe your relationship is at a point now where you really need outside intervention. So definitely there's no shame in seeing a relationship counselor, an intimacy coach, whatever it is that you need, make sure you go and get that and see how those individuals can help you in your relationship. So super important. Okay. And so as we wrap up, I want you to think of intimacy as not just passion, but about partnership in your relationship, care, and making it a priority in your relationship. So why don't you, just as kind of like little homework, and of course I never give homework in a podcast, but just something for you to reflect on and think about is, how about sitting down with your partner and creating a love and intimacy plan for, I don't know, maybe the month of February, right? And think about it as a roadmap for strengthening your bond. It could include a special date night, trying something new, maybe a cooking class, maybe skiing, maybe whatever, it's something that you've been wanting to do that you want to do with your partner. Maybe, ask them to see if they want to do it. And the goal is to be intentional and about nurturing your relationship and keeping the spark alive. And we know that novelty definitely keeps the spark alive. So try it, see what happens, let me know. And if these were suggestions that were helpful for you, I'd love for you to share this episode with someone that you love, and see how it improves your relationship. So, well, we are done here, and it's been real and really intimate. And I hope that you've enjoyed this podcast as much as I've enjoyed bringing it to you. And remember, this is not meant to be any type of medical advice. If you have any questions about your relationship or what steps you'd like to do to help promote and create more intimacy in your relationship, make sure you speak with a couples counselor or a sex coach or with anyone that is able to help you and give you ideas and suggestions for your relationship. And until next time, this is the Muslim Sex Podcast. So thank you for listening to the podcast, and make sure you leave us a review, share and like the podcast. And if you leave me a review, I'd love to shout you out on social media. So be sure that you share it with all your friends. And thanks for listening.